I'm continuously frustrated by Kathleen Kennedy's statement. We had no source material to pull from, so we have to just make this up. And I'm like, have you read all of like the expanded universe? There was so much that could have been pulled from that would have made that better.
That's also like a really bad excuse when you have like infinite money, infinite global you can literally hire anyone. There's nobody on earth who is too expensive or too talented. You don't get to go around being like, what am I supposed to do? Like invent new Star Wars stories? All I had was infinite money and time and talent.
All right, hey gang, welcome back to my channel. I am very excited. This is the first guest that I've had on all year, Neon Taster. I've been wanting to have you back on the show for a long time, probably for like 3 months. I know we've kind of kicked it back and forth, trying to fit it into our very busy schedules. And we finally made it happen on the one day I'm not doing anything. I don't know, you've got a very busy schedule because you're in high demand these days, but
Yes.
I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to talk about Star Wars.
Wow, yes, taking time out of my phone's it's buzzing off screen. I have no time for anybody these days. Me and
I mean, you
my
guys don't
pedestal of
realize this. He's got
fame.
a whole like behind the scenes team that's running the Neon Taster brand. He's got a
Yes,
personal assistant that like
exactly. I'm like
orders
George
his
Takei.
food.
I don't tweet my own stuff anymore. It's an intern that tweets my stuff.
Oh my gosh.
But
It's
yeah,
amazing.
like we did play catch, and like we always were playing different video games, never the same game at the same time, all kinds of
Right.
crap like that. So we're just always like doing past each other. But this is actually a really good opportunity because because Book of Boba Fett just ended, and now there's like a million TV Star Warsy things coming. It's a weird time for Star Wars, I gotta say. It is in some ways the worst and the best time to be a Star Wars fan.
It is. I'm so torn right now because I grew up a huge Star Wars fan. 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. That was my entire life was Star Wars. And obviously that was around the time the prequels came out. I know you're a little bit older than me, but it was just very like, even though I know now as an adult, the prequels really weren't of the best quality, but I have a lot of nostalgia for them just because that's what I grew up with. And then obviously the original trilogy is the untouchable. No one can say anything bad unless it's about critiquing Return of the Jedi on certain issues. But generally speaking, the rule of thumb is the original trilogy is the gold standard. Prequel trilogy, not so much. And then there's a huge divide, obviously, on the sequel trilogy. So kind of the way I wanted to start this for people is just as I don't know how many of how much of our audience crossover. There's probably quite a bit, but where did you kind of come down on that whole divide? Are you in the middle? Are you kind of either or how did you feel about the sequel trilogy and kind of the way Disney has taken the brand thus far?
Well, it's interesting. That's a good question because I actually recently started watching a bunch of like YouTube videos that analyze the sequel trilogy as a trilogy. Now that all three of them are out, because for the longest time it was about analyzing one of them or maybe two of them in relation to each other, specifically like how The Last Jedi was a response to The Force Awakens and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But now that you have like those three, there's a lot of people trying to like look at them as three movies. And it's interesting because I don't think there are sequel trilogy fans. There are fans there are fans of this era. But none of them are like trilogy fans. Because like people who like the prequels, they like the prequels. It's not like they like Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith, but they think like Attack of the Clones is terrible and ruins everything and is just awful. Like that's a weird, like that dynamic doesn't exist. Like in the original trilogy, like you said, some people don't like Return of the Jedi. I have like crazy. It's just it's like an inseparable part of like my formative years, discovering the things that stayed with me my entire life. And so Return of the Jedi to me like is a like it's sort of a magical movie. You watch it now, obviously like you go back and you watch Empire Strikes Back. It's interesting, even the special editions, which I actually saw in the theater. That was like the first time I saw Star Wars in the theater, was when the special editions came out in like the late 90s. And it was like finally I could see Star Wars in a theater. and they did they fixed, they improved it, which at the age that I was, kind of felt like they did. I mean, some of them didn't, but some of them did. It was kind of cool to see like extra footage and stuff.
Right.
But like even in those, Empire is there's very light touches. They didn't change. There isn't too much to like. Even Lucas couldn't like shove more things in the frame or whatever. It is an excellent movie, no matter who you are, and even like removed from Star Wars, it has a good plot arc, and it's well written and all that stuff. Like it is a legitimately good movie. But like people like original trilogy fans, or people are like prequel fans. Nobody is like a sequel trilogy fan. People are like, yeah, I like Force Awakens, I like Rogue One a little bit, I like this.
Right.
Nobody's like, yes, the sequel trilogy is I want to buy the box set of that trilogy, right? I can't wait for the trilogy box set to come out. And that's like so ridiculous. Like I can't believe it. I can't believe this happened. And I watched the disaster unfold. It was sort of crazy.
It was really horrifying to me in the last one, in particularly. I was sitting in that theater just like watching a car accident unfold. I am very, very down on the sequel trilogy just because we had so much. I'm continuously frustrated by Kathleen Kennedy's statement. We had no source material to pull from, so we have to just make this up. And I'm like, have you read all of like the expanded universe? There was so much that could have been pulled from that would have made that better that they just chose to ignore. And so it just frustrates me. We did have other alternatives to what we got on screen, and it just was not. It was so low bar and so kind of disrespectful to the original brand and the original.
That's also like a really bad excuse when you have like infinite money, infinite global. You can literally hire anyone. There's nobody on Earth who is too expensive or too talented to work on a fucking Star Wars, right? So you don't get to go around being like, what am I supposed to do? Like invent new Star Wars stories? All I had was infinite money and time and talent. It's like, fuck off.
It is ridiculous. And it goes back to what you're saying. It's excuse making. It's a complete lack of understanding of the brand itself. Disney wants to use Star Wars as basically, this is obviously just my opinion, but my opinion is fact, as we all know. But Disney wants to use Star Wars as basically an expensive advertisement for toys and merch generally, because that's how they make the most money. And so that's what I see Disney movies in general these days, and Star Wars movies in particular, and even the Disney Plus shows, to be just really, really expensive advertisements for toys. Now, this is one of the places where you and I may or may not diverge, but I am not a fan of Mandalorian, and it's partly because I feel like, again, it comes back to it's just a giant advertisement for toys of Baby Yoda or toys of the Mandalorian armor. I don't see a whole lot of excessive development on the plot or the story or the character arcs. So my next question for you is how do you feel about The Mandalorian? Because there's a lot of people who were disappointed with the sequel trilogy that then moved on and said, well, actually, we like The Mandalorian because at least it feels more like Star Wars and it's not, kind of this, detriment to the fans or this poke in the eye at the fans.
Okay, so it's funny that you said like Disney and the toys, and when Disney bought Lucasfilm, which was like 10 years ago, that was the first thing everyone said. Oh crap, toy Mickey Mouse, the Darth Vader with Mickey Mouse ears and whatever. And the first thing they did was be like, no, you're wrong. It's all going to be practical effects, and we're filming it on 35 millimeters, and we got Lawrence Kasdan, and we pulled the we went and we found the camera. We got some of the sand that got stuck in George Lucas's underwear when he was filming the original, and we used it on the set, to bless the set. We had some Tunisian sand from 1977 or whatever. And that was all. I remember that. And people felt like, okay, because they did realize, unfortunately, that turned out to be like the cynics were right? That turned out to be virtue signaling, essentially.
Yeah.
But it came from a place of realizing what it was about the prequels that was like hot in people's minds that they didn't like. It was a product of its time of like everything is CG and we could do everything CG and look at all this, and that was like out of fashion. And people didn't like that, and people felt like they didn't want that. So they were like, no, we're not going to do that. Don't worry. I mean, they did, obviously, because that's how, like, every Marvel movie's like that. But all you need is one cantina scene where everything's an animatronic, and people are like, okay, I'm okay. Yeah. It's not just somebody on a track. I mean, but I get it. It felt like, and J.J. Abrams knows how to put together a thing, right? He knows how to film a big thing outside where it looks right, doesn't look, confined and artificial. And so it felt kind of Star Wars, but with time, it turned out that all they were doing was that they were essentially like focus and market testing everything. But then they, like, for some weird reason, gave the second movie to someone who was like, I'm just going to break all of that. Like, that's the weird part to me. Like, if, like, the smart thing to do would just be to let J.J. Abrams do an entire trilogy, if that's what you want. If all you want is, like, what do people want? And let's focus in on the things that the audience wants and synthesize them into, like, distill them into something super saccharine and whatever. Just use him. But they brought some artsy guy who was like, I'm going to slay all of your sacred cows because screw you, because this is fun and this is how filmmaking works. And it does. I just not in episode 8, which I said at the time. Like I said, I'm the target audience for, like, oh, you love this character, I'm going to kill it. Yeah. But I don't know if this was the place for that. This was not the playground for that kind of storytelling, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There is a time and a place for that kind of thing. And I enjoy that as well, when you take a character and then you do something crazy with it that nobody expected. I'm here for that. It is Luke Skywalker really is, though, the sacred cow that they tarnished in that movie and, upset a lot of people, including myself. But I think that there could have been a better way of even going about that. You could have said, yeah, he kind of had a fall from grace in some of the expanded universe. That does happen. He does go to the dark side in many different of the novels. You could have done any number of different things, but they chose to do it in such a, destructive kind of stick it to the fans kind of way. I just, it was really left a bad taste in my mouth. And I think it left a lot of people, looking at that and just saying, I go to these movies in a lot of, for a lot of people, especially myself, I go to these movies for escapism, and it just, I walk away with, like, okay, so now I feel as crappy as I do in my real life. So
it's funny that you say that, because to me, The Rise of Skywalker was one of the most, like, incredible theater experiences that I had, but it's exactly for why you're saying. You say escapism. That's super important, right? Yeah. And when I reviewed on my old podcast, when I reviewed Rise of Skywalker, I said it's the most transparent movie ever, where you can see, like, the working parts beneath it, and so that kills any sense of escapism. Like, if every line of dialogue you're like, oh, they're saying that because the fans got mad, then that murders the escapism. It's like, it's not suspension of disbelief, but, like, it brings you back to the moment. You're like, oh, I'm watching a movie, right? Yeah. Oh, that was a meme. They're literally, the characters in the movie are responding to a meme. People were like, how did if Holdo could do the thing, then why didn't they just do that all the time? And so they just, like, they hand waved it in a line of dialogue. Oh, it was just a 1 in a million maneuver. Don't stop asking. Oscar Isaac looks right into the cameras, like, stop asking. Yeah. Stop asking me.
There's a couple other lines in that movie. It's been a long time. I've only seen it the one time, but there was a couple other lines in that movie that, again, take you out of that. And you're like, oh, that's a direct jab at the last director who screwed everything up. Like, it's incredible. It pulls you out of the movie. And so you can't enjoy it. I dislike that movie for the theater experience as well as for the movie. I had a really weird person sitting next to me in that movie, but I digress.
So you don't like The Mandalorian, you said.
And I'm not a big fan of The Mandalorian, and it comes down to, I feel like it is an exercise in visual effects over plot and character development.
Really? Because that's the one thing I think it does well. Because, look, here's the thing. product, right? You're given a product. It's
Yeah.
the same with Marvel. The fact that a Marvel movie, the ultimate point of a Marvel movie is to sell you a baby Groot, doesn't mean that the process of bringing you from not knowing what a baby Groot is to go into Toys R Us and buying a baby Groot toy can't be a fun process. Doesn't have to be a cynical, dumb process. And it can involve people who are like legitimately creative and want to like make the best of it. And in that case, that's a good example of that happening. Of them bringing someone on, and that someone was like, you want me to sell some baby Groots? I will sell some baby Groots for you. And like made it a popular thing. And I kind of feel there's a little bit of that with the Baby Yoda angle here. And so like, once you accept that all of this stuff is a commercial, right? Everything's a commercial. All anime is a commercial for comics and books. That's just a quick digression, but like there's an incredibly popular franchise in Japan called Haruhi Suzumiya. And the anime for that is just monstrously popular, and they just don't make them because there's no new books in the series to promote. They're like, we're not going to make an anime if there's no books to sell, even if the anime sells, because it's a commercial for the books, period. Right. Okay. But once you accept that and you put that aside, like all of that's a wash, because there is no, unless you consider like indie films to compete with this, this is how everything operates. And so I just want them to do it to make up the best thing that they can, like at least to make it worth my time, this commercial. Now the thing about James Gunn that's worth bringing up here is that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, at least it really feels like they like this stuff. Like legit. I mean, Filoni especially. Like the thing about Filoni is he like spent years making people love the prequels by like filling in a lot of those blanks with like good content that people enjoyed. All of the Clone Wars and all the Rebels and stuff. All of that is like him saying people had all these questions. How could this character have done this? And how all of these scenes got skipped. And then instead of doing like saying, go read this comic or go read this book, they made a bunch of animated shows, which are of varying quality or whatnot. But again, it created these characters that now are being brought in. Like now you bring in like Ahsoka in The Mandalorian and people are going crazy over a thing that's like not nostalgic really. Right. It's already like an extended universe-y thing being brought into another extended universe-y thing and people going crazy. Like you're kind of blending like sub brands now. And so at least it feels like they love it, and the stakes are smaller.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be the end of the universe. And I'm way more comfortable with them playing around in this universe if the stakes happen to be like, whatever Mando's storyline is right now. Or, I mean, Boba Fett had dumb stakes, like especially dumb stakes, but it's interesting because I keep swinging back and forth. Like I swung from a place of like I don't care about any of these shows to a place now of like I'm kind of curious because even if a show is bad, there might all of a sudden be a random episode that like has some of my favorite Star Wars stuff since I was a kid. Like that
is how they've been able to pull me back slowly, because originally, especially the first season of The Mandalorian, I was really turned off by the first season. And then of course they brought in Ahsoka in the second season. They brought in Luke. I'll put spoilers all over the title. So you guys know, if you guys haven't figured it out yet, Luke appears in the season finale of season 2 of The Mandalorian. And I was pissed because I missed that. And I was told about it. And then I had it all spoiled for me. And so it didn't have the impact. So that is why I ended up watching the Book of Boba Fett. And so I could talk about it with my coworkers because I had to know. I have to be in on the know. But I knew that they were going to do that to me. I knew that they were going to put in this obscure show that they probably knew that less people were going to watch than even The Mandalorian. I knew that they were going to put something like that in there, and they did, and I went crazy.
Yeah, so I did not see that at all coming at all. Like it's very interesting. And I have theories about the production behind this or not. But here's the thing again, because you're talking about like, there's the whole like Memba berries and whatever. It's not that Luke was in it. that I liked. Luke could have been in it and it would have been really bad. Like I
Right.
didn't want more Luke. I was like, Luke came, he took Grogu, and that was the end of it. Fine. I kind
Mhm.
of like mystery like that
Yeah.
sometimes. But it wasn't that they brought him back. It was what happened, like what we saw.
Mhm.
We essentially saw in this episode of the Book of Boba Fett, not only did we see, like some of the best, like pure Jedi training scenes since, Empire,
Mhm.
essentially, or whatever,
Yeah.
but also it was a really clever way of taking the dynamic between Master and Padawan, where Yoda was the small creature and Luke was the humanoid creature, and flipping that, because now he can like take that dynamic and flip it on its head and use it to like increase his self-confidence by saying like, my teacher was as small as you, but he was like the best Jedi ever, right?
Right.
It was really clever. It was really sort of the character work in it was really good, and I like those characters. I like it was there was character development for a puppet that doesn't
Yeah.
speak. That's really impressive. Like you don't see that a lot.
Now, the thing that I liked the most, I liked even more than the Luke scenes. I liked even more than anything else in the entire series, and probably possibly even more than the season finale of season 2, was the reveal that Grogu was actually one of the younglings at the Jedi Temple when the Jedi Temple was being attacked. That actually, this is why, like, I've never been a fan of Baby Yoda. I've never been a fan of that because I feel like it's just a play to get me to be a part of this brand, and there's no actual character for me behind him. And now all of a sudden, okay, no, he's actually really, really deeply connected to this universe that I did care about when I was a kid. And so that just opened it up. That was like the first time where now I actually care about Baby Yoda because there's a real connection to something that I cared about personally.
It
Um,
actually turns out I didn't remember this either. Turns out Ahsoka mentions this in the episode of The Mandalorian that's called The Jedi of season
mhm,
2. She says he was raised in the Jedi temple. It kind of went by me, but then somebody brought that
right.
clip up back in. But you're right, that was a very good. And once again, here's Filoni like tying it all together, right?
Mhm.
Bringing all of the different things into being a thing. And that's why I get this weird feeling that they're going to retcon the sequels. I think they
Yeah.
might retcon, and people say that'll never happen. Disney and that it's never going to ever happen. But here's the thing: their canon
Yeah.
currently is hobbled by what like everybody understands was essentially two people's like ego war or war of like personal taste. I watched this really good, like I said, video about the trilogy. It's called like Star Wars sequel, the anti trilogy or something like that. I gotta find I tweeted it a couple of times. But yeah, like he basically like distills the entire sequel trilogy into like two guys like having like a tug of war over what Star Wars means to them, right? But then like everybody else is now just going to be like constrained by this forever, when people were constrained because of things that George Lucas wrote into the canon. That I get because he's the guy who invented it, right? And so people had to work backwards because of the things that were going to happen, and you fill in spaces or whatever. That's fine. This is different. This is like, who made J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson the keepers of the Star Wars canon? Who said that in whenever they get, because the movies are going to go back to a different era now. That was the thing that they announced. They said it's some kind of, they have a project code name, and they're going to go to like thousands of years in the past. They're going to like wash their hands of this era for now. The TV Filoni verse is working in this era, and it has about 30 years worth, I think, to operate, right? Because we're about
Mhm.
30 years before the sequel trilogy. So you can mine this era for, I don't know, the next 5 to 10 years, and just be like, yeah, whatever, time split. I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever. That's now an alternate universe. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? Like, who
Well,
said
now
not?
let me bounce this off of you because what I've heard is, and I had never finished watching all of Rebels. I've watched all the Clone Wars. I've watched some of Rebels, but I guess the whole Dark Saber thing was introduced in Rebels, and there's something about that where you can actually open up. There's a character. Again, I haven't watched this yet. I've been told by other people there's a character apparently that uses the Dark Saber to open up another dimension or something like that.
Oh, see,
And
I don't know
that's
that either. I don't
okay.
know that either. But there's a little bit I know about the Dark Saber. It just has to do with Bo-Katan and why she essentially what happened was like she tried to be the ruler of Mandalore
Mhm.
because she had the dark saber, but because it was given to her and she didn't win it in combat, it was cursed, quote
Right.
unquote, which kind of led to the Night of a Thousand Tears or whatever it was called, where they bombed
Yeah.
Mandalore, which you also see in Book of Boba Fett, and it's pretty harrowing, like where they sort of carpet bomb the entire planet. And so uh there was and so that I mean that's all like I guess the idea is season 3 is going to be him trying to redeem himself, go back to Mandalore, because he's supposed to find, like there's the mines of Mandalore is the only place where he can
Right.
like I don't know, I have no idea what it's going to be about. But it's interesting that you say dimensions. I think Rebels also established like time travel as a thing that exists in this universe. And so
I think the moral of all of this is that you and I both need to go back and watch Rebels and then do another episode
I
discussing what.
guess. Look, I mean, so the Obi-Wan show is 3 months
Yes.
away. Okay. And again, initially I was like, who gives a crap? Now I'm like, it's not so much that I'm like all of a sudden invested in the story of Obi-Wan. I just want to, I'm curious. I got to see what they do now, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of they brought Luke. We know that Hayden Christensen is gonna be Anakin in it. Okay,
Mhm.
which then my theory is that the Ahsoka show is going to be heavily flashbacky. It's going to be about her because now she's old.
Right.
In the Mandalorian, she's already old, right? Cad
Yeah.
Bane is in his 70s, and she's like an adult. I don't know how long Twi'leks live or whatever, but she's old. Like her youth was in the 60 or 30 years before that. And
Right.
so there's definitely going to be Hayden Christensen is definitely going to be in flashbacks in that show. Chris Santon, who's the Wookiee in Book of Boba Fett, has a
Mhm.
scar on his head that he got from fighting Obi-Wan, which is definitely going to happen in the Obi-Wan show.
Yeah.
So it's all going to be, and then you got the Cassian Andor show,
Mhm. Yeah.
which is coming, I think, later in this year. And they're all gonna, and now that's it. And because they dropped those like 2 random Mando episodes in the middle of Boba Fett, you got to watch every other show now. Like you don't know, every week some weird thing can happen. But
I'm
that's
just really glad that I learned my lesson from the end of The Mandalorian because I missed the whole Luke thing. I missed all the hype, and I was so pissed off when I ended up watching it because I was like, I would have really enjoyed being surprised by this because I would have been shocked. And I can see how everybody else was shocked because it was such a deviation from the regular story. And so that's, like I said, why I watched the Book of Boba Fett.
yeah,
So
and you
that
were
is,
rewarded for it, I
I
guess.
was, yes.
And again, and you see, the thing is, it's because it's low stakes. It isn't Luke suddenly arrives at the end of the movie trilogy to save the entire universe. It's not
Right.
that. It's like, oh, here's Luke in this little story we're telling about a thing in this
Mhm.
universe. And yeah, they happen to brush up against the main story. I like way more. That works way better for me than the 2 all other things. One, like I said, Luke saving the day all of a sudden, and the other is just shoving stuff in the scene. What is it in? Is it in Solo or is it in Rogue One where it just randomly cuts to like C3PO and R2D2 saying like, "Oh, goodbye, ships," or whatever. It's
Yeah,
just like
it might be the end of Rogue One. It's been a long
I
time, but I
can't
think
remember. And then there's the one, and I think this is also in Rogue One where they show or is that no? I can't even remember where they
yeah,
show the guy who gets his arm cut off in the bar in Mos Eisley. He doesn't like you, that
yeah,
guy.
yeah. Well, like, why
The,
do we need so much, like, I don't know, it's almost like fan clickbait or, like, just throwing red meat, like, "Here's another little piece, and here's another little piece."
there's you know what, there is apparently, turns out there is no science to this, and if somebody does it lovingly, that kind of shines through. One of the
Right.
thing that I like a lot to see, and I have a friend who's like, who gives a crap, is when they keep using like unused Ralph McQuarrie concept art to do stuff in these shows. They're like, oh, here's a painting that we didn't use for like A New Hope, and we just made that set. I'm like, I love that. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's cool. That's
Yeah.
nice. But in something that's crappy and feels corporate, then you don't care. But if something feels fun and you're enjoying it, I always say this, like nitpick. I don't like nitpicking stuff that I generally enjoy. Nitpicking is fun when something is bad. You're like, let me now focus in on all the ways in which this is bad.
I think the sequel trilogy is what kind of has started me on this path of being a little bit more nitpicky. And I definitely need to kind of back off on that. But just to kind of round out the discussion, what are your thoughts on the future of Star Wars? You've kind of already touched on this, but let me just say this before you answer the question. I have a sneaking suspicion because they talked about Thrawn in season 2 of The Mandalorian. I would not be surprised. I mean, there's talks that they're going to be doing some sort of like a Thrawn movie, and I would love to see that because in some cases he might rival even the Emperor as far as real like character development, because we don't get a lot from the Emperor, and I don't really think we need that. But Thrawn, it has a much more sorted backstory that we really get into in the novels that I'd be interested in. So secretly, because they were talking about Thrawn and the Mandalorian, I thought, well, Boba Fett's about bounty hunters. Maybe they bring in Talon Karrde. Maybe they bring in Mara Jade. I don't know. So that's what my hope is that they end up doing. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on where they end up taking this.
So like I said, I have a weird suspicion that like something might happen that will allow all of this stuff to just keep playing out like without consideration for the sequel trilogy, but I'm not sure how that happens. If a bunch of our characters just like flee to another galaxy, maybe, or something like that, and then you got your Grogu, who is like literally the only force sensitive creature in that entire galaxy, which makes him all of a sudden super desirable to everything, and everything there is like new aliens. I don't know how you do that or whatever, but like you said, Thrawn, and by the way, the beauty of name dropping Thrawn is that I believe, oh no, I'm actually wrong because he was already in the animated shows. But the idea was Thrawn was like an EU character that got thrown out with the EU canon and then brought back in. And that also means that anything else that was thrown out with the EU canon can also be brought back in, right? Like you established that precedent. You know, it's kind of like what's going on with Marvel now. Doctor Strange, the trailer for Doctor Strange, which teases Patrick Stewart, Professor X in it, which just means you can like literally do anything now. And they already did it with Spider-Man. I mean, exactly. I love this because the idea is like it almost operates in the meta way, in the same way it does in universe. Because in the Marvel universe, there's a multiverse that has different universes. And what they do is like Disney literally has a multiverse of universes. Like they own the Marvel thing, they own the Star Wars thing. And so they're like, we'll create like an in-world link between our different properties. It's just a weird time to be alive, I guess.
Eventually Darth Vader is going to be fighting Iron Man somehow. And then we'll be able to pull in, eventually they'll buy the DC rights and Disney will take over the world, and then China will dominate everyone.
There will be some kind of Marvel versus DC. It's got to happen. It's got to happen. Yeah. Eternals had 2 DC jokes. They had a Batman joke. They had a Superman joke. That's something. It'll take some more time, I'm sure, but something like that will definitely happen. But yeah, like I said,
somebody had something planned. I actually wrote a fantastic piece of fan fiction in which that happened, but we'll just set that to the side.
Yeah, but like ultimately, like I said, my one sentence summation for where Star Wars stands right now is like, as long as you just give it to people who clearly like love it and want to do it, and there are 2 people right now, and every time they give it to them, they're great. Give Bryce Dallas Howard the next Star Wars movie to direct. I like the episodes that she directs. I think she does a great job.
And I agree with you that especially Filoni, these guys actually clearly care about what they're doing. Even if I personally don't necessarily like every single thing that they put out, they care about the property and they care about the material, as opposed to people like Kathleen Kennedy, who I just feel like has no sense of respect for the fans whatsoever, and no sense of respect for the material, and just had
She's
her
not
own
she's
agenda.
not Kevin, right? She's not Kevin Feige. I mean, she's one of the
No,
biggest producers ever in Hollywood, but clearly now what you see is she's not like a brand producer. Like she's
right.
good at like, you know, she's good at like getting the money and the people and the whatever, but like I think Kevin Feige is like a new animal. There wasn't really ever someone like that. And DC are trying to find their person too. You know, there are all kinds of different people who can kind of fill that role, but you need someone like someone to run your brand who like knows it really well. Feige
Mhm.
has been working on Marvel stuff since the first X-Men movie. He was like an
Yeah,
assistant. He was like an assistant producer or something like that on the first X-Men movie. He knows Marvel. And like you need people like that. And yeah, they need to be like a Filoni, you know,
yeah.
and as long as we'll see. I mean, I have a feeling that he's gonna kind of rise up to be the kind of Star Wars is kind of Feige.
Yeah, I have higher hopes than I did. I had completely at one point written Star Wars off. I thought this is over, this franchise is dead. Maybe it
Yeah.
comes back in 20, 30 years when they can redo it, but they're clearly taking steps to repair things, turn things back around in a slow way. And I agree with you that I do think that it's easier for them to kind of play around in these Disney Plus shows that have a smaller scope and a lot less impact, and so that you can make mistakes in there and adjust much more easily without actually doing damage to the brand, which I think
Yeah.
is a real benefit. And you can see that just in even them trying the different ways to bring Luke in with, he was PS4 Luke in the end of Mandalorian, and then they allegedly, I was hearing that they brought in an actual YouTuber who did a
Yeah,
better
they
job. Right,
hired this YouTuber named Shamook. That's, by the way, an interesting thing because, you know, a lot of people when Luke came around were like, "Oh no, here comes the era of the CG actors." No, this is
right,
actually that was because it looked great. But here's the thing: there is still so much artistry in sort of a deep faking to that level that they needed to hire the specific dude on YouTube who not only showed that he was good at doing this, but he was good at doing Luke specifically. And even then, they didn't overdo it. Many of
mhm,
his like speaking lines were off camera. I think they strategically gave him lines to say on camera. They were kind of simple, relatively simple cuts, not things where he's moving his head around and stuff like
right,
that. It's clearly really hard still to do in
yeah,
a way that sells. And so I wouldn't be worried about like Han Solo being like the star of the next, because people thought like, oh, there was some kind of troll that got people thinking that Han Solo was going to show up in the finale of
mhm.
Boba Fett, and I'm very glad that didn't happen because that would
I
have been again
yeah,
there's a way to do it. It's a really potent spice. You got to use it sparingly. You can't
I
just
agree.
dump a whole lot of Luke on us. It's gonna lose its bite really quickly.
Yeah, I think that that's something that my sister actually brought up is they're starting. I don't think that they pushed it yet all the way, but they are starting to with that. You really got to be sparingly. I was afraid they were going to bring him in the finale at the end of the Book of Boba Fett, and I was glad that they didn't. They actually got us back to the main storyline. But I think that they do need to be careful with that, because kind of the suspension of disbelief is going to end up working itself away during this period when they're still clearly like in the testing stages and trying to work out all the kinks here. But
Yeah, yeah. I can. I think we're heading towards the end, but I'll
yeah.
recommend in that context. I've been recommending this all over the place. A movie called The Congress. It's from 10 years ago. It's with Robin Wright, and the premise of there was a movie called Waltz with Bashir, an Israeli movie that won the Oscar. It's animated, and the guy who made that, Ari Folman, made this movie called The Congress, and it's like a science fiction movie about how in the future actors will have their like likeness digitally scanned, and then they continue to star in movies, but then the actor isn't allowed to make movies anymore. Like they
Mhm.
sell their like likeness, and then it's digitally used in movies and commercials and stuff forever.
Mhm.
And it predates all of this. Like
Yeah.
it's from 2013, I think. A really good movie, parts of it are animated. I don't want to say too much, but like it's a really it's kind of crazy and cool, really underrated movie. And yeah, kind of explores this whole idea of like digitizing actors so they can be in movies forever.
And here we are now, almost 10 years later, and it's actually happening. And there's going to be all kinds of legal issues with this, and probably already have been going forward. But I think I don't know if you watched the Disney Plus had like a making of the finale of season 2 of The Mandalorian, and it went into real depth on how they made that technology work for that episode. And they did talk about like the moral, implications and the legal implications that probably already have faced and will continue to face. And you could literally resurrect anybody at a certain point. This technology is going to get to that level where you could possibly have. I mean, they did it with what's his name, Peter Cushing in Rogue One. Was it Rogue One that they had him in?
Yes, it was in Rogue One. Yes.
Yeah, and he's obviously long deceased, so that'll be interesting to just see where all of that goes. Maybe Sir Alec Guinness shows up again after he didn't want to be in Star Wars anymore. And
yeah, exactly. He wrote those like crotchety letters about how awful it was to film it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could see it on his face. I have some bloopers that were really, really interesting to just see. He just looked like, please just end it for me now. Please, I don't want to be here.
I kind of love stories like that about people who like did a thing and they didn't realize like how big it would be, like how Burt Reynolds like hated Boogie Nights, trashed the production, and then realized that he would have won an Oscar if he hadn't done that. Like he was going to win the Oscar, but he had already like trashed the movie in the press. He fired his agent for like getting him the role, but it was like his big comeback role. He ruined his own comeback.
Oh my gosh. I mean, sometimes it's just better not to say anything at all. And I've learned that over the history of my life. Sometimes just don't say anything at all and just watch it all play out. So on that note, I'm going to wrap things up. But obviously, everybody knows to go and follow Neon Taster on Twitter. I keep thinking I can't call you Noam, but you've come out since the last time.
I know, right? Exactly. It's my face, whatever. Yeah. And also I have my own podcast now finally that I'm actually doing regularly called The Ambitious Crossover Attempt. And it is also on Twitter at AMBXOVER, AMBXover. Yeah, and it's just a weekly whatever culture war podcast, I guess.
Well, everybody needs to go and subscribe, check that out. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, comment below what you guys thought, and thank you again, Noam. I actually get to say your name out loud. I was so nervous on the last show, just a little behind the scenes. I kept stumbling and being like, no, I'm a Neon Taster. So it's just really nice for me to be able to use your first name, which is how I was introduced to you in the first place. So
yes,
thank you so much for coming on, Noam/Neon Taster.
Thanks. Bye.
All right, everybody else, I will talk to you guys on the next video.